Okay, like I said, thanks for coming tonight. Hopefully you'll learn a little bit about Laravel. Most of you know me, but just in case you don't, I'll introduce myself. My name's David Frame. I started working with PHP around 1999 to 2000, sort of early days, PHP 3-ish. Primarily interested in object-oriented programming, things like research and development, CMS development, frameworks, design patterns, that sort of stuff. My employment history, I was a research developer at Tibus, or simply Zesty as it's known now, from 2003 to 2012, my first job. I then moved to Bluecube Ivy Brown at the start of this year. I was there for 6 months, and I'm currently senior developer at 31 Interactive, along with Andy here, who is a technical director. Right, so on we go. PHP Renaissance. Past few years, there's been a sort of change in the PHP community, ecosphere. A lot of new tools and things have come along that have changed the way people go about making sites in PHP. It's made it a lot closer to the like of Ruby on Rails, Java, more kind of tested applications, better coded applications, and just better practices all around. And one of the reasons for this is better internals. So PHP 5.3, when it was released, brought in namespaces, closures. PHP 5.4 brought in traits. Just real sort of solid concepts to bring into the language, and frameworks and libraries and things like that all sort of took advantage of these, and they've just improved over time because of it. Yeah, before these came along, things were sort of boxed together, like name spacing, for example. You've probably seen the old underscore namespace system used. PHP 5.3 structured that into something that could actually be used properly. And yeah, it's reflected in code. When you see code now, it just seems a lot more solid. Better tools, Composer. If you were here at the last one, I think most of you were, Chris's talk about Composer. Composer has made such a massive difference to PHP, it really has. It's made it so much easier to bring in external libraries. It's made it easier to start projects, to organize your libraries within projects. Everything's just so much better with Composer. If there was one thing that's happened in the past few years of PHP that has really brought it to the next level, I think, it's Composer. There's also CLI tools, things like PHP units and other bits and bobs. CLI utilities are starting to get really big in PHP world. There's like Symfony's console CLI tool. Laravel has one as well, as we'll see shortly. Better methodologies. Object-oriented programming is, the quality of the OOP code now is a lot better than it was in the early days. Test-driven development has become a big thing. That's just standard unit testing. And DI, dependency injection, as well. Makes it again easier to bring in external libraries, things like that. It's all come together, really, and everybody benefits from it. Better standards, PSR, coding standards, which makes it nice because you can open a project now in Laravel or Symfony or Zend or whatever else, and you already know how code is going to be structured, how the files are going to be put into the file system, where they live, the actual coding standards itself within the code, how that's going to be laid out. All makes things nice and clean. And finally, better frameworks. Symfony 2 is a really, really major one. And it has probably jump-started a lot of this as well, this sort of renaissance. Zen Framework 2, Slim, Aura, Laravel, of course. I didn't put it last there because it's low priority. Yeah, so these frameworks have sort of kept up to date with these new things that have become along, Composer and so on, better development methodologies, standards, so on. Some frameworks and systems haven't really. WordPress, of course, is in its own sort of world. Drupal, I think, struggles a wee bit to keep up to date. CodeIgniter as well, unfortunately, hasn't really gone anywhere recently. So it's these frameworks that are really stepping up to the plate and taking advantage of all these new bits and bobs we have. Okay, I don't know what happened there. This is a big PHP revolution, which really sort of goes into detail about this whole process that's happened recently in PHP, the land of PHP. It's not released yet, it's coming out quite soon, but it's something to keep an eye on because it will explain a lot of these concepts in detail, in depth, and I think everybody could learn quite a bit from that there, so keep an eye on that one. I think it's on Leanpub website. Composer, just to fill out some space there, and PHP the Right Way, it's a website. If you haven't seen it, go to it. That will tell you how to take advantage of a lot of these things. It's a really great website. It's just a simple, single page with anchors. You can jump down and view various things about this. How to use Composer, how to use things like Vagrant, PSR standards, explains those, so on and so forth. So PHP the Right Way, definitely go to that. About this presentation, a very brief introduction to Laravel. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. It covers Laravel's 6 main elements as I see them. Will hopefully prompt you to learn more about it. Hopefully it's, hopefully you won't come away from this thinking, I never ever want to use Laravel. Hopefully you'll look it up a wee bit more. It's an interesting technology, so yeah. And it's not a sermon. I'm not going to try and preach Laravel to you guys. The truth of the matter is, any modern framework you use these days, doesn't matter if it's Laravel, Symfony, Zend, Yi, if you're using a modern framework, you're doing the right thing. They're much of a muchness, really. It's just a matter of personal preference, and if a particular framework meets your requirements for a particular project. So yeah, I personally wouldn't put Laravel above any other modern framework, but personally I do quite like it. It's something I've learned fairly recently, and it's something I've been getting into by working on other projects. So it's what I'm most familiar with now, I think. So I'm just here to share some of my knowledge. So Laravel itself, it's a modern PHP 5.3 full stack framework. That means it's not really a component library. You don't pull parts of it into your own application. You treat Laravel as your application. You just add bits to it. It's very, very loosely based off CodeIgniter. I mentioned that before. CodeIgniter has sort of fallen by the wayside recently. Sadly, the company who managed CodeIgniter, Alice Labs, I think, has decided to give up on it. They don't want to deal with it anymore. They're trying to shift it off on somebody else. And the CodeIgniter community sort of realized that things were stagnating a couple of years ago. And a couple of frameworks have come out of that process. Some of the developers have decided, well, I'll just make my own, and based their own frameworks loosely off CodeIgniter. Laravel is the most successful of all of these. There's very, very little CodeIgniter syntax in Laravel, but if you know where to look, you'll see it. Laravel also makes use of several popular and highly tested components, such as Symfony's HTTP kernel and HTTP Foundation, Monolog, which is a logging engine, SwiftMailer, which is a mail library. It does use a lot of Symfony's components, which is good because they're modern, very well tested, very well used, and it just sort of builds on top of those. And yeah, it works quite well.
Does it bring those in via Composer, or are they pre-built into it?
Yeah, it brings them in via Composer. It all just happens automatically in the background. You only know that Symfony is being used, or Symfony components are being used if you look in the vendor folder and hunt around, or you'll see them in the log as Composer's running. Just as an aside, actually, if you've never used any of Symfony's components, go and have a look into them. They're all quite standalone, so you can pick one up and just plonk it in your own project using Composer or something. They're really, really good. Really good. That's why Laravel uses it. Now, popularity. You might have seen this tweet. This is search for PHP framework, I don't know if you can see that at the top, on GitHub, and ordered by the number of stars. Top of the list is Symfony. Second is Laravel. So Laravel is the second most popular PHP framework now on GitHub. That's pretty amazing. It's only been around for a couple of years. It's only started gaining prominence in the past 6 months or 8 months or so. So to jump that far, it's above CodeIgniter, it's above Cake. Zend is further down the list, as is Yi, as is WordPress even. I think the unofficial WordPress repo is on there. Yeah, it's really impressive how much it's grown. And it's a good sign that people actually like it as well, if they've started. So let's jump into the areas I'll be covering here. Syntax, artisan command line tool, request routing, query builder and eloquent database layers, data templating engine, and the IOC container. I'm not really going to go into that much depth about these, but hopefully enough just to whet your appetite about it. So, syntax. Laravel is very expressive in its syntax. It's very English-like, the way things sort of chain together, the way its method calls chain together, and it's just looking at Laravel code, it looks nice, it makes sense. You can actually tell what it does without actually knowing what it does. Here's an example. Don't worry exactly about what this does internally, but you can have a pretty good stab at guessing that this is going to fetch 5 articles from a database. It's going to order them by date descending. It's going to skip 10. It's going to start from the 11th article. And that's it. So you can figure that out just from looking at that code. You don't need to know how the framework works internally. You can just see it right there. It's simple. And sorry, yes, there's a where clause as well, so the articles have to be flagged as being online. So pretty simple. That's an example of eloquent, actually, and we'll get to that shortly. Here's another example. Redirect to login with message login field. Pretty good idea what's going to happen there when that bit of code is getting executed. Cookie forever, remember me one. Sets a cookie forever. Lots and lots of examples like that. I just sort of picked the most, the first few I came across. It's very, very nice syntax throughout. And another element of the syntax is this idea of facades. Now, facades are static wrappers to instantiated objects. You probably saw in those last examples, you would seem to use static classes like db : or news article : or whatever else, cookie : These are facades. They're wrappers to actual objects, right? This is sometimes a tricky thing for people to understand with Laravel. Provide a quick, readable way to access Laravel's various components. Okay, they're really like aliases. Big misconception. Laravel is not in itself a static framework. It doesn't have lots of static classes sitting here, or sitting within, which have methods for doing this, that, and the other. It doesn't have that. It has static classes, but they shell out to actual concrete classes that are created in the background. It uses a little bit of magic to do this. It's quite clever. It's not complicated, but it's pretty smart. The facades are syntactic sugar. They don't have any functionality behind them, and you can bypass them entirely. You don't even have to use them. So instead of doing db : blah 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 blah, you can create a new database object, pass in whatever dependencies it needs in the constructor, and do exactly the same thing. It's just a way of avoiding all that and making your code really, really simple, straightforward, easy to read. And you can easily create your own as well, or rewire the existing ones. So if you decide that the current implementation of the auth facade, auth : whatever, is not to your preference, or you need to extend that in some way, or whatever else, you change a line in a file. So auth now points at a separate object that you could define in your own way, or extend. I'm going to give you an example of facades here. Here we go. App name equals config get application.name. This fetches a bit of configuration about the application and the name of it, funnily enough. Now, what this is actually doing in the background is a bit more complicated than what's happening there. Just by calling config get, Laravel is doing something like this in the background. It's creating a couple of objects, initializing them, passing them into an actual concrete config object or class, and then calling get on that object. So that's the result of that single call. And you can see that's the reason behind these facades. You don't want to be doing 4 lines every time you need a bit of config for an application. 1 line's enough, these facades. So, on to the next point. Artisan. Artisan is Laravel's powerful command line tool. It's based off Symfony's console component. If you've used Symfony, you know that it has a really, really solid console component that it uses for a lot of its operations. It allows for a number of application management tasks to be run from the CLI, such as code generation. If you're working with MVC and you need to create a controller, for example, there's a task in here that will do that for you. It creates a controller file, puts in all the code. Database migrations. I'm not going to be covering that in this talk, but if you're writing database migration files, they can all be run through this artisan command. And it's easily customizable as well. You can write your own tasks, and that's very, very useful. I'll give you an example. Actually, I'll show you one of the interesting features of artisan here. It's a feature called Tinker. Don't know if you can see what's in that window. Can you see it all right? It's probably a wee bit blurry. The way this works is you start Tinker, PHP Artisan Tinker, and at that point on, you're now inside Laravel. You're inside the framework, your application. You can start typing out code, right? And it will operate as if it's inside the framework. So in this example, I'm saying article equals news article find 1. I'm finding an article with an ID of 1. I'm echoing it out, and you can echoing out the title, and you can see the title there, test news article, and then setting the title to something else, saving it, unsetting article, pulling it back out again, displaying the new title, and then for shits and giggles, I put out the name of the current database. So you're actually using this interactive shell to access Artisan, or to access Laravel, and it's very, very clever. It's a great debugging tool. It's great for doing things like just simple tasks. If you need to update something in the database very, very quickly, bang, 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 done. So it's a nice utility. I don't think any other framework has something like that. So it's definitely one of the better features of Laravel. Now, to write your own command, again, hopefully this is sort of coming through, but that's all the code it takes. In this case, I've made a mailer command, and all it does is it fetches all users from the database, loops around them, sends an email to each one, and at the end of the process says echo sent whatever number of emails. This is done in one file, this top part, and then the command itself is registered in another file, a bootstrapping sort of file. And the result of this is, here's my command prompt. So you can see right at the top I've done a list of commands within Artisan. You can see right there, mailer send, it actually shows you the command as part of the available commands. Here I'm running it, it's very blurry, and it's run, and it says send 7 emails, just like that, from that amount of code. Very handy. Good for things like cron jobs and stuff like that, where you can just call something like that there in your contat file. Okay, request routing, it's part of MVC. I'm sure you're all familiar with how this works. So in like a routes.php file, it controls all the routing throughout Laravel. We'll have something like this here, root get news function. It uses closures for doing this sort of thing. So in this case, if you go to a site /news, you'll see paragraph containing news page. The get part is important. It's the noun part. That determines what sort of request you're making. So a get request will return that. If you post to that page instead, it won't do anything. It won't match the route. In this case, we're passing a parameter in. So we're going to news /an ID number, passing it through into our closure here, ID, and then returning the article with ID. So we're displaying that ID. We're also adding a filter here. So the last line where ID is, and it's just a regular expression, say this needs to be a number. And if you go to news / ABC, it won't match that route. It has to be a number, so it'll ignore anything else. This is all quite common stuff in any model framework. Root post, it's the same idea as get, but it only accepts or it only matches against post requests. So in that case, we're going to /inquiry /submit, and so long as something is being posted to that, we just output it. When something gets returned by one of these functions, that is what gets rendered in the browser. Okay. Routing to controllers. If you've used other frameworks, you might be familiar with this idea. You can have a class set up, so you have like a news class or a news controller class. You can tell the router to pass any requests to /news into this news controller class. Same for login there, same for admin. So then a news controller class, as it stands, would have several methods. So you're saying get, post, all that sort of stuff again. That's just determining exactly what gets matched. If you post something to the index page, it's not going to get matched. If you post something to an article page, it won't get matched. Post something to comments, it'll get matched, and it'll execute whatever code is between those spaces. Routing to resources, REST. Same sort of idea. We can pass in a class using this root resource command or method. So if you now go to /news, it still goes into news controller, but it expects something slightly different. It expects methods like this: index, create, store, show, edit, update, destroy, REST methods. You'll see there's no get or post in front of any of these. It doesn't need to be. It knows that if you're going to an index, it's get. If you're doing create, it's get. If you're doing store, it's post. If you're doing show, and so on and so forth. The other verbs, things like put and delete and so on, they are handled by Laravel. Modern browsers don't really handle those as well just yet, but Laravel sort of does some magic in the background to make those work. And you can actually see here, if you do something like this, if you use the REST controller, you get this sort of format out of it. You can see what I was saying about the other verbs there at the bottom, but get news controller index, and so on and so forth. Okay. And it actually passes through. So if you do get news ID edit, calls news controller edit, and passes through the ID for you. Okay. Root names and filters. One of the nice things about this setting implicit roots is that you can name them. So in that top block of code there, I'm saying that a get request news / an ID is going to be called article. That's the label I'm giving to that root. Okay. The good thing behind that is you can now reference article somewhere else in your code. Anywhere else, you can do something like redirect root, the name of the root, and then pass through the ID that it wants to see. The reason for doing something like this is it keeps things agnostic to the URL. The URL of the news page could change in the future. If that's the case, all you need to do is change the root there, that bit. Everything else just works. Any other calls to, if any other page tries to link to that, so long as it's using this sort of format of referencing the name of the route, it'll be correct each time. Filters. When you do a route, you can specify a filter that runs before it actually gets matched. A filter is just a function that gets called, and it's very, very useful because you can determine if something is valid or not in PHP code instead of just doing like a regular expression. So in this case, we're doing root get admin array before auth. So we're calling a filter called auth, which conveniently is right there. We're defining it as root filter auth function, and this is the function that gets called. Looks to see if auth guest, i.e. if the current user is a guest, they haven't logged into the site, return redirect to login page. and that just means that any request then, the /admin, as defined here, goes through this bit of code, and if you try and access the admin area without being logged in, it puts you back to the login page. You can specify any number of filters. They can do all sorts of crazy things. That auth one is actually in the framework by default, something very similar to that. I just kind of grabbed it out as it's a pretty good example of it. But yeah, you can define your own. So next, we have Query Builder and Eloquent. Query Builder, feature-rich database abstraction layer implemented using PDO. Okay. It allows you to manipulate a database using object method calls or using raw scale. Fluent interface, chainable methods. You saw before the sort of arrow syntax in a couple of the examples. So you would wear arrow all through these methods. It's got a clean English-like syntax, mainly because of that fluent interface. It supports more complicated database operations, such as joins, aggregates, unions, and it even does caching, which is pretty impressive. If you've used frameworks before, it's comparable to ZenDBSQL or Pair's MDB2 package. Okay. Give an example of how this is used. Selects and inserts. So I think it's pretty clear what's going on there. It's selecting data from a posts table where the online flag is 1. It's ordering by date descending. It's taking 5 records, and get is just the sort of the prefix at the end, or postfix rather, and to say time to go and get these. The end is sort of chain, the fluent chain. Next example then, it's another where. In this case we're getting something with a specific ID. Table posts where ID equals 15, and we're using first instead of get. That just means that you don't get an array back, you get the actual record. It may be in an array syntax or an array format, the record itself, but it won't be an array of arrays. It won't be a collection of them. Inserts now. Again, pretty damn clear. Yeah, I'm not able to say anything. That's just obvious what's going on there. Pass in an array and it gets put in the database. Updates and deletes, just as easy. In that case, we're fetching a record that has an ID of 15, updating it with a new title and setting it to be offline. Easy. And in this case, we're deleting something. Getting the same record, ID equals 15, delete. It's gone. Other handy features of Query Builder. Pluck, which is a way of just simply getting a single field back from a database. So we're looking at posts, we're looking at ID equals 15, and we're just getting the title. That'll just come back as a string, just like that. Doing a join here. The syntax is fairly clear from that. You're specifying the table that you're joining to right there, and then the criteria of the join. So category ID equals categories.id. And we're, in this case, we're looking for all posts that have a category ID of 5, and we're getting them. And that's a join. They can be a lot more complicated than that. There's different join types, but that's just a simple example of how it's done. That's pretty obvious what's going on there. Looking at a reviews table and getting the average rating. Just like that. Pretty simple. Now, on to Eloquent. I pressed that once. Eloquent is an object relational mapper built on top of Query Builder, right? It uses the same syntax. It allows database entities to be mapped to PHP code, commonly referred to as models. You've probably seen this before. A model definition can be quickly set up using an appropriately named class, so no getters or setters required. If you've used something like CodeIgniter before, setting up models is a pain in the ass. You have to specify tons and tons of get methods, set methods for all the various properties. It has powerful features such as relationships, eager loading, so it will only load in joined records and things like that when it needs to. Event triggers, you can trigger an event when something is fetched using Eloquent. It's quite smart from another part of your application. accessors, mutators, and a lot more. It's comparable to Zen DB Table Gateway, if you've ever used that. It's comparable to Doctrine, if you've ever used Doctrine or Symfony. Propel as well, and Redmi, which is an ORM. So, example of a model class. Okay, I'll go through this line by line. There's a joke in up here. I'll go through this line by line. Class post extends eloquent, right? We're creating a model called post and extending eloquent. That's how all models are created. So the next line then is that's all you need in your class to create a model. You can then use that model throughout your framework or throughout your application rather. Call methods on it to fetch records, access properties. That's all that's needed. Now, you can add a lot more to that if you want. This does a wee bit of cleverness to figure out the name of the database table that it's mapping to. If it's wrong, you can specify the database table, no problem, and you can add other functions on there. In that case, we're getting a summary property, or we're defining a summary property, and it's just a truncated version of content, this content, which is going to be a property, obviously, or a field in the database. I'm truncating it to 150 characters. You can use that throughout. So, quite simple, quite easy to set up. And I'll show you selects and inserts using Eloquent rather than Query Builder. Same sort of syntax. The difference is that we're looking at post instead of DB. We've set up a model called post. You know what it is. It's mapping to a posts table or a news post table or whatever in the database. So we can just say post where date is less than or equals to the current date. We're using this DB raw syntax, which means that anything passed in here into this where clause isn't quoted. If you quote cur date, it'll break. Obviously, you can't quote cur date when you're doing an SQL query. DB raw allows you to pass that through without the quote. And where online equals 1, get. So we end up with a post object out of that. Or sorry, several posts, a collection of post objects that we can then use in our templates or wherever. How do we find a single one? Just like that. Pass in the primary key, the ID, as it will usually be. Post find 5. You know, I have post with ID of 5. You do something with. Insert. It's pretty straightforward again. Create a new post. Okay, so we're not using it statically anymore. We're actually creating a new instance of it. Setting the title, date, online, save, and that's in the database. Updates, deletes, conversions. Same sort of idea for an update. Find a post with ID of 5, set its title, set online, save again. That's in the database, it's persisted. Delete. 2 ways of doing this. Find a post with 5 again and call delete, or do post destroy 5. Same thing. Conversions. You can easily convert both a collection of models, posts, or you can convert a single model. So this first example, post all to array. It's getting all posts in the database, converting it to an array. It's just an array of arrays then. So you can work with that in whatever way you need to. And then the second example, to JSON. So finding post with ID 5, converting it to a JSON string. You can send it through to Ajax or whatever. Relationship definition. Obviously, to get the most out of SQL, you need to be doing databases, you need to be doing joins between tables. It's dead easy to do it in Eloquent. This is the syntax again. We've got our post model here, and we're adding a function called comments to it. And in there we're saying, return this has many comments. That is basically saying that a post can have many comments. And in this case, we're passing through the model name, comment. So we've already got a model called comment set up. It's just down here. These will be in separate files. And then this here we're going class comment extends eloquent, same thing. But now we have a function called post. And this returns this belongs to post. Comment belongs to a post. So, how do you use this? Well, as you might expect, like this. Post equals post find 5, you're getting post with ID 5, echoing its title, and doing for each post comments as comment, and echoing the comment, echoing the text and the author. That's it. Nothing more needed there. You can do the opposite. Get a comment with ID of 25 and just echo whatever post is associated with that. Get the title, put it out. No messing with SQL, no adding extra queries in there, no doing anything. So very, very simple, very, very quick, and very, very customizable as well. You can set up the keys that are going to be joined on, you can set up different types of join, you can do a hell of a lot with this. It's very, very good, very flexible. Quick and easy pagination, this is the last sort of feature of Eloquent that I want to go into. It says it all really, it's quite straightforward. You can easily paginate a record set, it comes back from the database. So we're just saying post paginate 10 means we're fetching 10 items, 10 posts, and here we're looking through them, and at the end we're doing this posts links, right? Whenever you do a query like this here where you're fetching several models from the database, what you're actually getting is a collection object back. It's set up to be array accessible, so this is why you can iterate around it, or whatever the interface is, I can't remember. So you can iterate around this without doing anything else. And in this case we're also calling a method on our posts collection. And posts links just puts out a little bit of markup in that format. So you'll end up with something like that. If you're using Bootstrap, it will be formatted like that, or whatever Bootstrap theme you're using, it'll just work. No more messing around with, trying to figure out which page you're currently on, which pages are coming up next, and so on and so forth. It's right there. And of course, you don't necessarily have to use post links. All of the information about the current page, number of pages, so on and so forth, exist in the posts collection. So you can fetch that out, customize it to your heart's content if you want to. So Blade, template engine. Blade is a quick and relatively simple template engine for rendering your views. Laravel doesn't use a pre-existing library for doing its views and templates, which is a little strange. There's two very, very solid libraries out there, Smarty and Twig. The guy who has done Laravel, Taylor Otwell, has decided to go down his own route and create Blade, which is a very, very simple but quite functional templating engine. It features many of the core functions found in other popular engines. So Blade views a PHP scripts. You can use PHP code directly in your templates. With caution, you don't want to be doing that very often. If you've got chunks and chunks of PHP code in a template, you're probably doing something wrong somewhere. That should be getting done in another part of your application. It's inheritance driven, they allow for multiple layouts, sections, etc. It's something fairly standard now. Sort of Twig and Smarty have that. Here's a very basic template. Include header and do H1 page title. This curly brace syntax is used for outputting variables that have been passed in. If you see 3 curly braces like this, it means the variable is being skipped, HTML skipped. If you see 2, it's not. Right? So always use 3. In that case, we're just doing count posts, articles to display, with for each and around them. Very, very PHP-like syntax for the for each and the if statement underneath it there. The way this works actually is that your template you produce simply gets fed through a search replace. So it'll look for these tokens, for each, if, so on and so forth. Using regular expressions, I think, and replace them with the actual PHP functions that do those same things, PHP constructs. And then it sort of caches or compiles it into a pure PHP script. Now, how to render a view. So here we're here we're back in our roots.php file. We're specifying our roots. In this case, we're just using Eloquent, getting a collection of posts, assigning it posts. Then we're doing return view.make news. There will be a file called news.blade.php in a views folder in your application. You don't need to specify the .blade.php part, just call it news. And we're passing through page title, news, with posts, and those are what get output here. Page title, posts, just like that. So width means pass a variable through into your view. Now, layouts. You should probably be doing this instead of doing include header, include footer. Hopefully you're familiar with this idea. We're creating a layout.blade.php file up here. Very, very basic HTML layout. Header, footer, and then this little part in between, div ID equals content. And this function here, yield content. Then we have home.blade.php for our home page. It extends layout, and then section content. It defines the bit of content that we want to have appear in here. So if you do view, make, or view, whatever it is, sorry, I can't remember. If you view home.blade.php, you get this layout, this content injected in the center there. And this works all over the place. You can have multiple yields. So you could have a section in your home.blade.php for sidebar. You could be putting out sidebar content, footer content, whatever way you want to customize each page in your website. You could set up yields and sections to do so. And you'd have multiple layouts. You could have a simple layout, you could have a complicated layout, you could have a print-friendly layout, so on and so forth, mobile-friendly, etc. Now, this is the last section. IoT container. This is the complicated bit, as I've been told. Andy seemed to think nobody would get this. I disagree. I think
no, it's not that nobody would get it.
I'm kidding. What the hell is an IOC container?
Dependency injection, inversion of control.
Correct. Quick word on dependencies. Dependency is when one component, typically an object, relies on another for its operation. Okay? So if you have, say, a controller class in your application that is, I don't know, sending out an email, and you do within the index method in your controller, you do mail equals new mail, whatever, blah, 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 blah. You've created a dependency there, right? That news class now depends on your mail class being set up. If the mail class breaks, or if something goes wrong there, or you need to change that mail class, you have to go into your news controller and change it there. So that's a dependency. Now, there's been a push over the past few years towards dependency injection. That is, dependencies should be passed or injected into an object via its constructor or setter methods and not instantiated inside it. So you're no longer doing inside your news controller index, you're no longer doing mail equals new mail. Instead, you're passing in an already instantiated mail object into that controller, into its constructor. Right? That's the idea. The problem with directly instantiating dependencies is considered bad practice as it reduces scalability and flexibility. If you, like I said, if you need to change that mail object at some point, change its implementation, or change just how it operates, or pass in an extended version of your mail class, you have to go and edit every controller, every file, every class, whatever that makes use of that. It's not great. You might miss something somewhere, and you end up breaking your application. So, yeah, don't instantiate things in your code like that. It's not a good idea. It makes objects difficult to test in isolation. If you're doing any sort of unit testing, DDD, you'll know that ideally you should be testing objects in isolation. That means an object stands alone. It doesn't depend on anything else. You're not interested in testing anything else. You're not interested that your news controller is able to send out an email. That's not the concern of your unit test on the news controller. You're testing that your news controller calls an index function and it displays it has a particular output, a view that's coming out of it, and so on and so forth. You don't care about mail. If there's something wrong with the mail component, that will break your test, but you're not concerned with the mail component. It's a news controller you're interested in. If you're passing objects into your own classes like this, if you're injecting these dependencies, you can pass in mock objects, right? Objects that you know match the functionality that's expected, but you know for a fact that it works. Okay, so you mock these objects up. it's a little bit of work involved. There's PHP Unit has a mocking engine. It's not great though. There's a more standard, industry standard one called Mockery, which does a better job of it. Yeah, go have a look into it. It's actually quite interesting, the whole mocking side of testing. And yeah, so you need to be injecting your dependencies to actually make the most of it. So here's dependency examples. Bad, good. Class computer, got a protected property in here called processor. Public function construct. This processor equals new processor until I set this namespace there. Bad, not good. You're directly instantiating an object from within your class. You shouldn't really do that. This is a better approach. Class computer, protected processor, same idea. Public function construct, and then we're passing in something. Passing in this processor interface. Now, we're going to assume then that all processors here implement this processor interface. So it will this constructor will only accept objects that are implementing that interface. So we get to this point, and then we assign it to our property. So we're not instantiating anything within our computer class here. We're passing something into it. So what is IOC? In software engineering, inversion of control is a programming technique expressed here in terms of object-oriented programming, in which object blah 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 blah. It's from Wikipedia. Don't worry too much about the jargon behind it. In Laravel, the IOC container is a way of automatically passing dependencies into your objects and storing them for later retrieval. The one downside of passing dependencies into your objects, doing dependency injection, is that you end up with massive constructors. You're constantly passing in objects that your classes rely on for their use. So that means just bloated code. Good code, but it's bloated and it's difficult to read. The IOC container gets around this by defining a little function here which tells the application how to define an object for you. So in this case, if we jump down to this here part, we're saying shopping basket equals app make shopping underscore basket. Right? What that means is Laravel will go and hunt through its IOC container to see if it finds something called shopping underscore basket. And how it's defined is this bit right here. So app bind shopping underscore basket is this function. And then we're doing a little bit of object instantiation in here, saying return a new shopping basket object with a new customer, it's been passed in the constructor, with a new delivery service, in this case I've decided parcel force. That's it, that's returned. So this here, with one call, does this. Okay? You're not needing to pass in any dependencies, make any objects, extra objects, things like that. Just calling this here produces a shopping basket. It has its dependencies already preloaded. Now, one thing about this here, multiple calls to app make here will produce multiple shopping baskets, multiple shopping basket objects. They'll be initialized each time, created each time. The way around that is to use Singleton. Exactly the same concept. Instead of doing bind, we're doing app Singleton, giving it a label again, function, and in this case we're returning an object called user session, passing in the current remote ADR for the current user. The first call to app make, same syntax, user session, that will create this session object, so that's instantiated. A second call to it fetches that object. It's already been created, doesn't need to be created again. So you don't have to worry about multiple objects being created and getting lost and confused. Any number of calls to app make user session after the initial call will just fetch. Okay. Right. This is the really smart part of Laravel right here. This is what it's all sort of leading up to in a way. IOC automatic resolution. Okay. If you type hint dependencies passed into the constructor, then Laravel can do the rest. And you should be type hinting dependencies. Like so, processor interface, processor from our example before. Now, Laravel is smart enough that you don't actually need to do a bind to access this. through the IOC. Okay? So long as this class exists within your application, you can do computer equals app make computer, and it will return an initialized version or an instantiated version of this class object, which is quite clever, smart. It gets even smarter though, because public function construct, we're expecting processor. So how does it know that if you want a computer that's here, how does it know what to put into this? What type of processor the computer has? You can specify it right here. So what we're saying is app bind processor interface, processor Intel i7. This means that any time you pull something, pull a computer or whatever, stock, anything from the IOC that has a constructor with processor interface in it, will pass in processor Intel i7. Okay. Now, when you think about how this sort of works, it's really, really clever, because say you have a dependency on a database, or a dependency on a mailer, or a logger, or something like that. So you have classes strewn all throughout your application that have mailer interface mailer, or logger interface logger, whatever. Okay. You can set your application to use concrete classes for all of these, using these bind statements, and they will always return that. Your objects that are returned will always have these here passed into the constructor. So if you have, another example, you have, say, a mailer set up, and lots and lots of classes in your application are requiring mailers and their constructors. You pull them all out of the IOC, and you decide at a later time, well, actually, the mailer I want to use has changed, or I want to use my own custom bespoke solution instead of Swift mailer or whatever else. Instead of having to hunt through your code to find where your mailer is injected into your constructors for all of these objects, you change one line. You just say, my new mailer interface is whatever. Everything else knows to use that then throughout your application. Now this concept alone probably might seem a wee bit out there and a wee bit overly complicated and other things, but if you're coding with this idea of dependency injection, this is a lifesaver. It really is. It just makes things so much easier, so much cleaner. Yeah, it's really, really good. And if you're in any way interested in this, I'd ask you to just go and read up on it a little bit, read up on dependency injection in PHP. It's an interesting subject, and once you learn about it, you start thinking, how can I make use of this? And you start seeing solutions in your head and ideas about how you can use these things, and it's quite interesting, it's quite exciting. Okay, so nearly done. IOC container plus facades plus Laravel. Static classes used to control Laravel are known as facades, as we covered earlier. Facades are nothing more than wrappers for the IOC container. Okay? You call a facade, say, let's go for mail. So mail : : there is an object in the IOC container that's been pre-registered by Laravel that mail facade knows to go and collect and call whatever methods on, right? Therefore, every single time you see a facade such as db, config, view, root, whatever, blah blah blah, any of those static facades, you're creating and or fetching pre-registered object. It's already been done, it's already been set up, and maybe a config object requires whatever number of dependencies in its constructor. Those get passed through automatically by the IOC container. You can easily create your own application-specific IOC bindings and facades as well. It's just the way to do things. It's very, very slick interface, very, very easy. And you can have a static class facade that you can use anywhere in your application and pass in any dependencies and things like that if it needs from within the IOC container. Very, very, very clean solution. I know it is difficult to get your head around. I've actually toyed with the idea of doing some sort of screencast on this concept of using the IOC container and facades together. I don't know if that'll happen or not. It's a bit fanciful. And do you know what? That's it. Further resources about Laravel. Website and documentation, of course, laravel.com. GitHub, the framework itself is on GitHub. Laravel Ins and Outs is a site, has a Laravel podcast, which is quite good. Laracast is absolutely essential. It's a series of webcasts by a fellow named Jeffrey Way, and he is very, very good at screencasting. He's very, very good at explaining things. He's very, very knowledgeable about Laravel. He puts up about 2 or 3 videos a day, and it's indispensable. The only problem is there's a subscription behind it. I think it's like $9 a month or something. Not very much money for the amount of knowledge you get from all these videos. Very impressive. Laravel cheat sheet is just a single HTML page with 3 columns and tons and tons and tons of different methods that are being called and the different facades and things like that there. You can get some ideas just from browsing through that, how everything sort of fits together. LeanPub is a publishing website which contains a number of Laravel books, ebooks. Taylor Otwell, the guy who created Laravel, has a book on there. Jeffrey Way has a book on there. A fellow named Dale Reese has 2 books on there. There's some other ones coming out in the near future. And for some reason, all Laravel books that are on there are the most popular ones on the website. So take that for what it's worth. If you want to follow anybody on Twitter, got Laravel, of course. Taylor Otwell, developer of Laravel, and Jeffrey_Way, who is the Laracast fellow. Yay! Thanks for watching, guys. If you want to contact me, there's my details. And yeah, so I hope you learned something today or found that interesting. I hope you're not too sleepy. So yeah, thanks very much.
Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, far away.
Not from you.
Well, obviously I'm a framework guy, and to be honest, this great talk, honestly, superb. Like I'm very, chip on my shoulder with Symfony and nothing else to come across, but you've actually maybe wanted to go into it. There's a couple of questions I do have is,
yeah, sure,
with the likes of like big data now and schemaless databases, it looks like the only database solution Laravel supports is SQL. And that kind of worries me because it's like, if you were to build like, say, document-based applications, which seem to be the way now for content management systems, how would that fit in? So Mongo, for instance.
That's a very good question. I don't really know the answer. I know that there are plenty of packages out there for Laravel, bundles that have been created, lots and lots. It has a massive community. It's one of the nice things about Laravel, actually. Its community is huge. And I'm pretty sure there are packages for the like of NoSQL, but I can't be 100% of that there. How those tie into the like of Eloquent, Query Builder, I'm not so sure. I'm really not. Presumably Eloquent only really deals, because of its syntax, with relational databases.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. No, that's true. So.
One last question, I guess this is to everyone basically. These frameworks coming up now, they seem to be all taking like stuff off Ruby and Express off Node and stuff like that, and I see all the different like being exposed to like Node, and then I've actually looked at Rails. I see all these traits that now PHP are actually putting in. Do you think like PHP's so far behind it, this is the catch-up point? I mean, like, are these other frameworks and other solutions, are they getting it right that now it's time for PHP to, do you feel like that?
It's kind of embarrassing in a way, because you're absolutely right. Rails in particular has been such a massive influence on every PHP framework. Rails got it right to start with.
I agree they do as well, but I don't like it. But
yeah, it's
but they did. They got the solution right.
Yeah, I think because of that, because they knew they got it right, there's a sort of arrogance in the Rails community. It's not very newbie friendly and things. Ruby's not. I don't think it's a particularly fun language to deal with. From what I've seen of it, I haven't used a lot of it, but what I have used has been kind of tricky. But Rails was an awesome framework, and yes, PHP frameworks are still playing catch up. They get things right. It seems to be just a progression. They pick up on one element of Rails, or Node, or some other framework. They'll implement it, and then the next iteration of that framework will implement another part of Rails, and so on and so forth. It just seems to keep on going. This eternal sort of incremental version of trying to get Rails into PHP framework.
Yeah, I think that as well, and it saddens me as well because I love PHP. It's my first language, and it just seems to be like, you know, if you want to find out what Laravel and Symfony or Zend are going to introduce, just look at what Rails is now, and it's going to be there in a matter of months. You know,
there's so many just even basic concepts like active record, like having a model. This idea of an object that maps to a database table record. That idea, it may not have started with Rails, but Rails popularized it, and it was a matter of these PHP frameworks then looking at this and thinking, oh, that's interesting, we should do that, and implementing it. And it's now such a standard thing that people have sort of forgotten that this is where it came from. Yeah, it is a little embarrassing, but it's good in a way because it shows that PHP developers are aware of these and are aware that these are the right ways of doing things, Rails is the right way of doing things, and they're implementing them in their own frameworks. So it's not like they're going down the wrong track or saying, no, Rails isn't the right way to do it, I'll do it my own way. No, it's borrowing heavily from Rails, and I think that's a good thing. It gets away from this sort of arrogant approach of Rails because you're admitting that, yes, you did it right, so we're going to borrow. Whereas within the Rails community, it's more of a, we did it right, ha ha ha. So, there we go. Any other questions?
I got a couple. One, are we putting up like presentations on the PHP Belfast website?
The PHP Belfast website is in the process of getting built properly at the moment. It's just a simple blog. But last month's presentation is available on SpeakerDeck. Dave, I'm sure, will load his up on the SpeakerDeck too.
I have a screencast coming. Forgive me that it's late, you know, 9 to 5 jobs, kind of that's the last thing you want to do is come home and look at more code. But no, I have a screencaster for the Composer one, and I'm guessing from the recording, I'm going to be putting on YouTube too. Yes.
It's up to you.
Yeah,
yes,
we do have an empty YouTube channel.
Oh, right.
We are planning to populate it as we go. But yeah, there will be more stuff coming.
Cool. I had the Eloquent, real quick. So has many through? Is that one of the relationships available?
Has many through?
Yeah, as in like a lookup table.
Oh yes, yeah. There's a many-to-many relationship.
Right.
It uses like a pivot table in the middle, then that controls the many-to-many relationships. And yeah, it's all very transparent.
Okay.
Again, it works very well. It's a wee bit more difficult to get your head around. Obviously, a many-to-many relationship is slightly more complicated, but the syntax is easy when you have it figured out.
Yeah. And the other one, so the IOC at the end.
Yeah.
So what is when you're binding those what are you binding it to exactly? I saw that app there.
App is
the app.
Yeah, exactly. Whenever you first bootstrap a Laravel application, it creates a new instance of app. So it actually does $app equals app. And the app is a Laravel application. It just contains several methods. It actually extends a class called container, which is a dependency injection container, which has some of these methods. So
it itself would be like a signaled in IOC.
Exactly. Okay. It's kind of bizarre. The app, whenever you create it, this app variable, it registers itself into itself. That's why you're able to access app : from throughout your application. It knows that app is actually itself. It goes in the IOC container and fetches itself, its own variable, its own object, and that's why things like bind and everything else work throughout the whole application. It's one of the very first things that happens whenever you start a Laravel project, or start running it rather.
You mentioned earlier about caching.
Yeah.
Does Laravel support database caching straight out of the box?
It's there are a few methods that you can use to cache database query results, things like that there. Caching, it's well supported throughout. You can use APC, you can use memcache, you can use file-based caching, database-based caching. I think you can also, it's already like cache, but if you've heard of like Redis before, like the key pair value storage, you can use that there for very simple caching. it's all controlled very, very easily.
Does
There
it
is
have
actually,
like helper methods or anything to help you then deal with busting the cache? And
oh yeah, I mean, you can easily. To be honest, I don't really know that much about the cache thing. I haven't used it. I've just read all.
but there's definitely stuff in there. And
Oh yeah, there's a cache facade that has a ton of methods, and yeah, there's various different caching systems that can be used, just plugged into it very easily, quickly.